Rebels have taken control of Syria and overthrown the Assad regime.
Fox Eye political expert Ric Epps is here to break down what happened and what will come next. Rick, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
The rebels taking over the capital, what is it, 10 days? Less than 10 days?
Just about 11 days now. Started on November 27th, and in a matter of a week and a half approximately, they managed to capture several of the major cities. Starting with Aleppo, the governorate of Aleppo, and then Hama and Homs, and then next thing you know, they're knocking on the door at Damascus.
How were they able to do this so fast?
You know, that's an interesting question because, first of all, the American government was completely caught off guard about how this all happened. But, what happens internally that the opposition groups, which were led by the HTS, which is also led by a gentleman named al-Jilani, and what happens is several of the opposition groups got together. Some of them were backed by Turkey. They got together. But my assertion is that they probably had reached out and made overtures to the security apparatus within Syria, some of the security forces, because you don't get to normally come in and do that without having people who are on your side. Many of the security forces were not in support of Assad. In fact, they were very disgruntled. They were not motivated to protect him. And when that happens, leaders fall. And it happens, it's a historic reality in the Middle East.
Leaders fall, but this was more than that. This was a family that had ruled that country for almost
over 50 years.
50 years,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So what does this mean now, big picture, for Syria, for the government of that country? Because the guy who's taken over, he's making a lot of promises about a sectarian tolerance, the term they're throwing around, but this guy's a former al-Qaeda fighter.
Yeah.
So when you see that, what's happening?
You know, it's interesting because on one hand, so the Prime Minister, al-Jalali, is staying in place. Temporarily until the government transitions. This is really where it gets complicated because, and I taught a class on revolutions, political revolutions at UCSD several years ago. And revolutions are a beautiful thing to people who really get into them for the right idea, right?
Sure.
They want change. The danger is that, just what you mentioned, the person who comes into power, even if he legitimately wants to try to create a connected society,
right?
Rarely does it ever end that way. Right. Most of these, you come in making promises so the people follow you, and then what happens are the real facts. You've got to be able to protect yourself so that people don't try to overthrow you, especially if you're trying to institute changes that may not resonate with the people. Right now, the people all over the world, the Syrian people around the world, are thrilled, and yes, they are opening the prisons, which are a good thing for the political prisoners. The question is going to be is whether he has legitimately had his moment where he realizes that if does he want to rule, or is he going to allow for some semblance of democracy and creating a public infrastructure that will allow for the people to have water to keep running, electricity to keep going, food, jobs, the economy. Those are the things that made Assad very unpopular. Can this new government do that? And if they can't do it quickly enough, how quickly will the Syrian people tire of again, what looks like the same old thing, even though it may not be quite as repressive early on?
You talk about the people, Rick, and we've often, every time we talk about this, how all these countries and these governments are in somewhat connected. We know Iran support over the years. Yeah. So I know a question over the weekend popped up for a lot of people is, could Iran be next?
That's probably not, because the Iranian government is fortified by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. If the IRG got tired, if the Iranian government was not taking good care of their security infrastructure with all kinds of benefits, then they would be liable as well.
But does the fall of this, do you think, destabilize what's happening in other countries around there?
Well, it can. Remember, this all starts with, it goes back to the Arab Spring in 2010. And that's when even the Syria started to come, all the push toward democratization in the region took place, starting with Egypt. But Syria didn't fall as a result because of two things: Russia, Iran, and actually Hezbollah as well, which is part of Iran, right, the proxy. And that's what allowed for the Assad regime to survive. But what it did was they decided to repress the people. Over hundreds of thousands of people died in that region. So then what you end up with is a civil war that lasted almost 14 years that led to what we have today, which is his ouster.
You mentioned Russia, you mentioned Iran, you mentioned Hezbollah. They're all distracted now.
Oh, absolutely.
The rebels pounced on that opportunity. Assad reportedly in Moscow now with Putin. What does that mean? Is he just say, hey, can I just now be here? Or are there plans to maybe take back Syria? What do you think is going on in that meeting when Assad rolls up and is in a room with Putin?
Well, Russia's in a very precarious position with regard to this because they have the Tartus military base there and they have an air base there, both of which have been evacuated for the most part. They moved the ships off, they moved the planes off. So I'm sure that Putin is not very happy with Assad right now. And because remember, that base is the only Western base that Russia has to reach the West, to the Mediterranean and to Africa. So with that being now compromised, the question is, will Russia try to make overtures to try to be friends with the new group? Or would they try to push Assad back into power? I doubt that. I don't think they think they realize Assad.
Friends with the new group is funny because he gave al-Jawlani, he gave that speech. And if you kind of listen and read what he says, there are messages in there to Iran, to Israel, to the world essentially. Right? What does he say?
Well, first of all, he's already made overtures that they promised they're not going to bother, like because the Chinese have a foothold there too. So they're not going to bother the Chinese nationals, they're not going to bother the Russian nationals, they're not going to bother the U.S. nationals because they know better. They know that will blow up in their face. What he is making overtures is say, hey, we're willing to do business. Let's talk business. Right? This is all about business and in terms of how are you going to help us rebuild our infrastructure? How are you going to help us fortify our economics so we can feed the people, which is what people want, right? That's a basic means of survival. And and Russia is going to figure out how they can manage to maintain that base there. If they don't, that really cripples them geopolitically. And the United States, if they're smart about this, may have the opportunity in this to be able to make a deal to say, hey, you leave Ukraine alone, then we'll let you still. We won't try to make a deal to subvert the Tartus.
You mentioned those troops, but before we got to go. But the American troops are in Syria. So.
Yeah, they're going to be there as advisory. They're not going to. They'll not be engaged. That will not happen.
We could talk for this.
We'll follow up. I'm sure.
Ric Epps, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.